for joining today to this event. This is a very special event for everyone. We have the visit of Shahidul Alam here at El Colegio de México. It's really an honor for us to receive him, and we're very happy that you can join. Also, thank you everyone for joining online. Special thanks to the Embassy of Bangladesh for arranging the visit of Shahidul Alam and for bringing him to Colegio de México, and also for organizing the this exhibition, right, that was done yesterday. Images that break silence, imágenes que rompen el silencio. So if everyone is interested in the catalog, you can check it in this QR code afterwards. So the roundtable that we have today includes activist, photographer, and artist Shahidul Alam. He has witnessed and reported the independence of Bangladesh for many, many years. Also, we have professors from our center, Ishita, Banerjee, and Saurabh Dube, and Tati from Purdue University, right? And also we have one of our former student of ours, Laura Carballido, who is now in the UAM, right? UAM, Cuajimalpa. So, well, I'm not sure if you want to share some words. I would like to again thank the Embassy of Bangladesh. Also mention that Shahidul Alam kindly donated a book for our library. So if everyone is interested, you can check it later. And also we'll move around these two books, the one donated and another one, so you can check his work. So Daniel Perez, thank you so much again.
In the name of the Embassy of Bangladesh in Mexico City, in the name of the Ambassador, Mr. Mushfiqul Fasal, I would like to thank Colmex as well. We are here. We have gone through a long process for bringing Mr. Shahidul. Finally, he is with us here. So my intervention will be short. I just want to do two things. Number one, thanks, of course, every member on the table. And the second thing, of course, is promote our exhibition, because it's an alternate event, right? This is an alternate event which is based on the exhibition that is currently being exhibited in the museum, en el Museo Vivo del Muralismo, which is in the Ministry of Education, la SEP, en el centro. So you are all invited whenever you want to go there. The exhibition will be there from 29th August, which was yesterday, was the opening, the great opening, till 29 January 2026. So in the name of all the staff of the Embassy of Bangladesh, thank you again. Thank you to the Center of Studies Asia Africa, and well, that's all.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And well, now I'll leave it to you guys. I'm looking forward to hearing you and to see what you have to share about art, activism, and the fight in Bangladesh.
Well, thank you very much. Muy buenos días, muchas gracias por estar acá. We're very happy for you to accompany us. And I'm really, really glad to host you. Let me know. Can you hear me better now? Yeah, thank you so much. So it is really an honor for me to be here to share the table with my dear professors who've already reminded me how long has it been. So thank you so much. I mean, they are son de la casa, so I won't really bother presenting you. But I would definitely present Tithi Bhattacharya. She comes from Purdue University. She's a historian, and she's a Marxist feminist. So happy to have you. And of course, for Dr. Shahidul Alam, I'm not going to take the trouble of reading to you his CV. I think it would be a waste of time. So I'd rather chose three things that I wanted to mention to share with you, which I find particularly interesting. One of them is that when he was a PhD student, he belonged to the Socialist Workers' Party, so in London. So I think that's particularly interesting. One of the photographs that you can get a look at in the exhibition that Daniel just mentioned is precisely a photograph that captures the people protesting the solidarity movement in Polonia, no? So I think that's a very, very moving photograph, particularly because Alam has himself said that that's one of the moments, that made him think about the power that photograph, that images have. So that's one thing. The second comes from the works, from the very initiatives that he's begun. I want particularly to mention the Drick Picture Library Media Organization. You can all Google it and find it. It's really a wonderful resource. It's described, as a media organization, several initiatives it has, but I found one particularly interesting, and is that he has, one of the initiatives is a rural visual journalism network. What this group looks is, to create not only to portray images from Bangladesh, to showcase the work of photographers, all over the world, the majority of the world, by the way, the people that come from the South, from South countries, but also what I really like is the idea of capturing, the everyday life. So I mean, of all the things that you can find on that webpage, I enjoy that. And coming to the exhibition that is currently in the Museo Vivo del Muralismo, there is one picture I really enjoyed. It's one dealing with a Chakma activist. It's the photograph of the book. She was taken away by the Bangladeshi government because she protested she protested against some decisions, and I really find that photograph interesting, because it's only the book, and the book is there. It's a book that was lying on her shelf, and it's one of the few things that we have to remember her. And I particularly enjoy that, and I found that photograph fascinating because it tells us about a long, long struggle in the region, the indigenous populations living in Chittagong Hill tracts. So I really like that. So without further ado, please let us begin this conversation. Thank you so much again for being here with us. That's a round of applause.
Shall we go? Okay.
Please.
Well, thank you for all being here. I'm delighted to meet you. It's far away, and one of my concerns is that countries like Bangladesh and Mexico know so little about each other. Our colonial roots direct us towards a certain type of knowledge sharing. We know far more about our colonizers and their world than we do about each other, and I think this is an opportunity for us to address that, perhaps. Since Laura mentioned the initial linkage, I was never a party member of the Socialist Party, but I did join their meetings and was influenced by them very much. But having decided I would take on photography, having made a conscious decision of taking on photography, one of the things I was beginning to look at was how photography is disseminated. Because really, while photography is a very powerful medium, it's the gatekeepers who really are the power brokers. They determine what story is told. I mean, there is this expression, African expression, until the lions find their storytellers, stories about hunting will always glorify the hunter. And I think that applies at many levels. So in my case, there was an epiphany. There was a particular moment. I was having a show in Belfast, and I had friends living in Newry, a nearby town, small town, and they suggested I stay with them, and it's always nicer staying with friends. And they had a 5-year-old daughter, Karina. I'm very fond of kids, and Karina and I, we became very good friends. Whenever she saw me, she would jump to my lap, we'd smother each other with kisses, tell each other stories, and that was how it went. So Karina was moved to Mum and Dad's room, so Uncle Shahidul could have a room for himself. So I've just come back from the show in Belfast, and I had some coins in my pocket. I'm putting them on the table. And Karina, instead of running up to me as she usually does, is standing at the doorway, staring at me. I said, "What's the matter, Karina?" She said, "You've got money?" I said, "Yes, I've got money." But you're from Bangladesh. You know? She can't make it fit, you know. This is a 5-year-old girl. Her parents are NGO workers. They give donations to Bangladesh. And here's a Bangladeshi who has coins in his pocket. It doesn't fit. And that began, you know, those were questions in my mind. This sort of environment, political, social, cultural, in which a child grows up, which is incapable of seeing a Bangladeshi as anything other than an icon of poverty. And of course, the reason that happens is because of the gatekeepers. My country and India and perhaps many other countries, Mexico, countries which I call majority world countries because we happen to be the majority of humankind, are largely known by white Western photographers who come to our countries and they tell our stories. So one of the things we decided we would do is to set up a photo agency in Bangladesh which would distribute those images. Now, at that time, and I'm talking about the late 80s, the primary photo agencies were in London, Paris, and New York. There was no way a Bangladeshi photographer could engage with an agency out there, quite apart from language and money and everything else. So we decided to set up in Dhaka, where the storytellers would have access. Then we began to ask ourselves the same questions because, you know, within that power structure, myself, a male middle-class photographer with an expensive camera, is actually quite far removed from many of the people we are trying to depict, particularly if you're talking of the subaltern. A woman who doesn't have a door to shut on my face will not consider me to be much nearer than the white Western photographer because I'm in this end of the power spectrum. So we decided to try and address that initially. In 1992, we started training women photographers. And we set up a small group called Onno Chokhe Dekha, Seeing with Another Eye. And we ran this workshop. They did beautiful work. We showed it at Shilpakola Academy, our Academy of Fine and Performing Arts. These were largely middle-class women, and we didn't have role models at that time, so we brought in an Asian woman photographer from Britain to be our role model, to work with them. But the work they produced was fabulous. I'll cut a long story short. I discovered very soon that while they had addressed gender issues, they were certainly not addressing class issues. So then, 2 years later, we started training working class children. I'm very happy that several of them now are my colleagues. And many of them are seasoned professionals working in other areas. So those were the things we began to do. And now I'll backtrack a little bit because when I left Bangladesh, that was 1972, immediately after the War of Liberation, we had gotten rid of our occupiers. And I was coming back, I thought, to a free country. But I discovered it was being run by a military general. So I joined in, along with many others, trying to bring down this general. And as I was taking pictures, that became my personal work. When I decided I would go to Bangladesh, I wanted to do photojournalism, social justice was my interest. But I didn't have the credentials. I'd never worked for a newspaper. I didn't have a track record. I didn't have tear sheets, any of the things you would need. And I certainly didn't have the right connections either. So no one was going to give me a job as a professional photojournalist. But I was a skilled photographer. So I managed to get work as an industrial advertising fashion photographer. But that wasn't what I was interested in. So that was what paid the bills, and I was in the streets taking the pictures I wanted to take, trying to bring down this general. And that began a story which I call the struggle for democracy, which sadly continues till today. Democracy is not so easy to attain, and we often have the perception that an election in itself gives us democracy. Obviously, it's far from the truth. So there's a period which you will see in this exhibition which looks at the struggle to bring down General Ershad. And there something very interesting happened. On the 10th of November 1987, a young man, part of this movement, he had painted on his bare back, "Let democracy be freed." And the police killed him that day. So on the 10th of November 1989, in memory of Nur Hussain, I decided to do an exhibition which commemorated what Nur Hussain was about and questioned the regime. Of course, the general was still in power, so while by then I was a known photographer, D'Alliance Française, who was going to sponsor this show, took one look at the work and said, "No way are we going to touch it." Yeah, we took it to the Academy of Fine and the Art College. They had a different excuse. It's photography, it's not art. Yeah, so you have all these sort of ways of denying us. So, but we managed to. We were initially going to put the pictures up on the walls of the press club. We managed to get in. We had a show there. There was a sequence within that which has to do with the contrasts. In 1988, we had one of the worst floods in a century. And before the floodwaters had dried, there was this very opulent wedding of the daughter of a powerful minister. And of course, I juxtaposed these pictures. That was part of why this exhibition was so problematic. Now, the thing that was very interesting is that there was a magazine owned by the minister's wife which wanted to review this show. And I was somewhat surprised. I mean, here's this show trying to critique this minister, this regime, and this magazine wants to review it. But I was happy, yeah. So they did a review and they waxed lyrical about the show, beautiful work, the artistry of his work, the lyricism, the quality of the prints, all that sort of thing. Never mentioned the politics, yeah. And then I got the message, yes, the artist can be, you can get a grant, you can get an award, we'll fate you, you'll be famous, just leave the politics out. So that was when I decided I made a conscious decision that I would not allow my art to be separable from my politics. I would create work where the politics would be embedded within the work, so I would not allow them to detach it. And that leads to some of the work. I mean, that Laura was mentioning earlier, the work about Kalpana Chakma, for instance. She was an indigenous woman who'd been abducted on the 12th of June, 1996. Many years later, the case is still ongoing. It's Kafkaesque. They keep deferring the investigation. The last excuse given was, because she can't be found, we can't investigate this. I mean, this is an investigation into a disappeared woman. So they find very interesting excuses. But the point was, how was I going to tell this story? Now, this is one of the things we grapple with often. When we're trying to get a message across, often what we do, certainly as journalists, is we produce the data, we produce the evidence, we produce the analysis. And while that is very useful, that doesn't in itself engage with people sufficiently. And so that is where the art comes in. We have to find ways through which we break that, because the data is often known. I mean, who am I in Mexico, you would know much of what's happening. So giving you more data doesn't actually, it might help the prosecution, but in terms of the general public, it doesn't make a difference. What I did at that time was, Kalpana was abducted by the military, and when there was this investigation, the indigenous people were asked questions, the Bengali settlers were asked questions, and the military was asked questions. And of course, the version of the indigenous people was never taken into account. And there was not the forensic analysis that should have been done. So I decided I would do a pseudo-forensic analysis, whereby I would ask the silent witnesses who had seen this work, who had seen the abduction, who had never been asked. Now, the indigenous people themselves had been asked, and I don't think that would have made a difference. So what I did was, I walked along the path that she had been taken in her last journey and picked up objects along the way that would have witnessed her disappearance. And I used a pseudo-forensic technique, as a forensic scientist would have done to unearth data, to interrogate these objects using, through a range of mechanisms, using very high magnification photography and other mechanisms. And I tried various places. I started in Bangladesh, then I worked in Britain at Falmouth. They had an electron microscope. Then I worked in Oudenkirk in Germany. Eventually, I discovered there were these very specialized microscopes in the Brain Institute in Brisbane. And I went there smuggling in these objects, because in Australia you can't take in barks and other things, and produce this imagery, which in a sense was the point of view of these silent witnesses. That was the work I did in the first phase. In the second phase, I looked at her personal objects, which is what I was referring to, because often when you do this, the humanity is left out. You know, that Kalpana was a woman, a living woman who had all the attributes that you and I do. Often that is detached from the representation. So I photographed her everyday objects, trying to bring her back to life. In the third year, I did something very different. There were these people who'd been campaigning for her justice, and I decided to do a story on the champions, the people who had championed her cause. But again, remember my idea of ensuring that the politics be embedded within the work. In the last conversation I had with her brother, she was talking about how there was in the very last days before she was disappeared, she had an altercation with Lieutenant Firdaus, her abductor. And the argument was about the fact that the military had burned their villages. So I decided I would use fire to produce my images. We had by then begun a campaign called No More, as the name suggests, things that we should not put up with. And one of the campaigns we'd been working on was the garment industry, where a huge amount of injustice was taking place. And I began to look to see how I might combine this. I don't see it here, but you will know that there are youngsters wearing torn jeans. Yeah, it's quite common. Now, those torn jeans are designer tears. You actually have a designer in North America or Europe sending the design specifications to Bangladesh, where this laser device etches these jeans, and when they're washed, they break, they tear in this random fashion. Yeah? It's very carefully orchestrated random fashion. So I took the laser device that is used in the garment industry, and using reverse algorithm, developed a technique through which I could actually burn the straw mats that the indigenous people would live in. In their homes, I found almost no furniture. They just had these straw mats. So I decided the straw mats would be my canvas, fire would be my tool for producing the imagery, hence the laser, and I developed a technique whereby I took portraits of these people and used this laser to etch, to burn charcoal onto these straw mats to produce the imagery. So when we showed the work, you start with a dark space in the gallery. So when you walk in, the first experience you have is the smell of the burnt grass before you've seen an image. There was no artificial light, so we had candles, and each of the warriors lit one of the candles. So slowly the candles light up and you begin to see these straw mats, which are burnt charcoal. So it's very performative. And we also had a poem read out by another indigenous activist, which then the audience is asked to read out alongside. So in that sense, we began to find ways through which the audience could become part of the work by a participatory process. So that's the sort of way in which we've done it. I will just refer to one other body of work and end there, because otherwise I'll take too much time. Something else that had happened was in Bangladesh there was a lot of crime, and the government set up what is called the Rapid Action Battalion. This is a paramilitary unit which is specially given a license to kill, effectively. Yeah? And that's what they did. Initially, people were happy. Criminals were being, and you will relate to it in Mexico, obviously, you know, extrajudicial killings which are being justified and things like that. So, but very soon it became a Frankenstein, and you could hire RAB to kill your political opponent. You could hire RAB to extract money from people and do all sorts of things. So I decided I would do a story on extrajudicial killings. Now, the RAB was not hardly going to tell me, by the way, Shahidul, we're going to kill someone. Can you come and take some pictures? Yeah? That was probably not going to work. Also, showing bodies was probably not going to be very effective. I mean, people knew the story. What happened was the people were killed. The following day, there was a press conference where it was said, so-and-so was captured. On the way, there was an ambush. They died in the crossfire. And it's almost an identical press release with just the names of the people changed. And it kept going on. And, you know, obviously everyone knew what happened, but that was the government verdict. So I felt producing more evidence was not going to achieve very much. So what I decided to do, we did extensive research, and what I decided to do was to photograph the site where the body was found, but take pictures of what I felt the dying person would have seen in the last moments, last living moments. So there were several aspects. Again, the fact that my politics could not be detached from the art itself. The way to do that was every photograph was taken at the moment of death in ambient light. So at the location, at the moment of death, in ambient light. The only other light source I used were torches. Because when I spoke to people, that was the first response they had. Torches being shone on their face when the Rapid Action Battalion came. So you have all those elements. The pictures were beautifully composed, so they're very beautiful pictures. But there's no blood. There's very little data to go with the images, but we had a Google Earth map where the entire case study was available. So if you went to see the show, you would find a beautiful image, but very little other information. You go to the Google Earth map, and that tells you what is behind. And for instance, you will see in this show, if you go, a picture of a paddy field. It's a very beautiful, pristine paddy field. And the data then tells you that the people in the locality ask, well, if there's a skirmish in a paddy field, the paddy is disturbed. How come, except where the body was found, the paddy is pristine? Then you find out that the shirt the person was wearing had a single bullet hole, but the body had multiple bullet holes. And slowly the story begins to unravel. And those are the ways in which this goes. When we tried to show put up the show, of course, the government shut it down. We took the government to court. That was a time when the courts still had enough independence to rule against the government. They were going to lose, so they withdrew the police on the last day. We had the show up for a day. And within the gallery, we had an empty canvas. We asked people to write down in their hand a name of one of the people killed. So this was a way in which, again, the audience could participate. And then as the show traveled, that canvas traveled with it. So it carried the messages of all these people. There was one young man who came and he said, my brother isn't there. And it's true, our research was not perfect. and there were people who were missing. So he sketched his brother on that canvas. So that canvas became a living thing as it went along. And then I'll just end with this last bit. There was, what I decided I would do then is to interview the policemen who were surrounding this place. And I asked them, here's this picture of a paddy field. Why are you closing down a show about a picture of a paddy field? And he says, yes, it's a paddy field, but you look at the word crossfire, and then you know what must have happened in that paddy field. And he goes on to give a wonderful conceptual analysis of my show, which he's shutting down. Yeah? But I, of course, photographed him, and that video I showed at the Tate Modern when that show was there. So now when I show the work, that becomes part of the show as well. So it's a living exhibit in a sense. It gathers momentum as it goes along. And I'll end with that for now because, I think there's several of us and we can discuss. But I just said that with the idea that we have, as artists, as journalists, we constantly need to find ways to engage. And too often, the system has a way of making us irrelevant. And part of our struggle is to continue to struggle to ensure that that relevance remains.
I know, should we give Tithi perhaps?
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Okay. Buenos días de nuevo a todos y gracias y al señor Daniel Pérez de la Embajada por hacerlo posible. Thank you. It's such a rare privilege to have you amongst us, really. So it's, yeah. Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everyone, for making this possible. I will go into a few things that you did not touch upon because I have read up a lot on you and I'm fascinated by your work, but not just your work. I would mention Drik, of course. And Drik, in an interview, you say that Drik comes from the Sanskrit word, which is vision, but it also means, the seer, the one who perceives, right? And you mention inner vision. So he has this photo kind of workshop, right, where agency, where he's trained loads of Bangladeshi photographers, and he's been helped by his friends from abroad also. But the most important thing, I'll come to that, is that this inner vision, I would like you to speak more on your inner vision because it's you who see, right? And then I would like to know, you did mention that it gathers momentum, it's a living kind of engagement, but what you see and what your photos, that you show, what kind of vision, the reciprocity of the vision that you get from, your continuous engagement, let's say, with politics, with life, that's one. The second one is, I found that very interesting. You said that to, really make the majority world relevant, that you're not just trying to get hold of the subaltern. You want the people, who actually control, let's say, the shows, everything, no? So it's that you want to sit at the table with them, okay. Obviously, you have been very successful. I wanted to know, even, let's say, quote unquote, the subaltern photographers you have trained, what has been their reaction to sitting at the table with, let's say, the dominant. Thank you. And I had a question about social justice, but I'll leave that for Tithi now. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I can't say I see much more than others. I think we all see them. Often we are trained not to see. And not seeing is part of our protection mechanism, because really we live the world we're in. I mean, all of us are surrounded by the same political pressures that affect everyone. One of my concerns before I went back home was whether, I'd left home as a 17-year-old. I went back when I was 29. I didn't really know my parents too well. They were very important people for me. And I wanted to live with them. I'd lived a very independent life. And I knew it wasn't going to be easy to be living with my parents, given that they perhaps had different norms and different acceptability and things like that. But it was very important to me. But I began to see things that I would have thought they would have seen as well. My parents were very progressive, very educated people. My mother was someone who migrated from Kolkata to what is now Bangladesh during partition and wanted to set up a school for girls. No one was interested. She bought a tent for 10 taka, pitched it in the middle of a ground, got 14 kids, and set up a school and college, which is now one of the most well-known schools and colleges in the country. So that's the type of person. They were obviously people who were very progressive, very liberated. But I'm from a middle-class home, and I suspect it's similar here. We have home help. And sometimes the home help is a distant poor relative who also comes in and works. And, it's good for them, and it's certainly good for us. There was a young boy called Mizan who used to live in our house, and he used to clean the room and whatever. We used to have a room, the drawing room we call it, from the colonial times. In Bangla we call it Boitok Khana, where we watched television. My parents would put television. My dad's favorite program was Alif Laila, a Turkish program, It was also Mizan's favorite program. We sat inside that room to watch TV. Mizan sat outside the room through a little doorway to watch TV. His space was not our space. It wasn't physically very far away. He was just outside, but psychologically, politically, it was very far away. And we brought out calendars every year, and I've got some here, and I will give you one, because we use our calendars as a vehicle for social messages as well. The calendars, when I started, were about pretty women, flowers, landscapes, exotic things, mosques. Those were the standard motifs for calendars. We decided our calendars would be about social messages. And in 1998, our calendar was about family life, because we recognized that family life itself was a very political space. So I took a picture of Mizan watching TV. We printed it in our calendar. I gave a copy to Mizan, I gave a copy to my mother. The next day, Mizan sat inside that room to watch TV with us. It is what photography can do, but only if you have been able to see. Because physically it was there. All of us saw it every day, but that question hadn't been asked. And until that mechanism of putting it in the calendar, placing it in front of my mother and Mizan, created the interaction which allowed that shift to take place. So that is one. The second thing you were talking about? The majority world, yeah. So the first question we had was, the G8 countries. They make up 13% of the world's population. I may be in a village taking a photograph of a farmer in a field. That farmer in the field probably knows more about what's going on there than anyone else. I, because of my proximity, perhaps know a little bit more. The person who knows the least is the picture editor in New York Times, who is far away from that. Yet, that is the most powerful person in the chain, and the farmer in the field has zero say in how that image is going to be used. So we needed to turn that around, and we began to ask those questions. So when a leader of a G8 country, which makes up 13% of the world's population, makes a decision which affects the farmer in the field, it is not a democratic process. That farmer in the field never chose him or her to make those decisions, yet they're the ones who are empowered and we are not. So we began to start with the lexicon itself, because the terms being used was least developing country, developing world, third world, very derogatory terms for what we are. I recognize that we have poverty, we have lack of resources, but that is not our own identity. We have a very rich culture, we have, and India, for instance, was one of the wealthiest countries there were, which was raped and pillaged for producing the wealth of Europe and whatever else. So we decided, A, we would turn that terminology, and then, because there's another little story. There was a show in Oxo Tower in London about development, and I looked at good work. I saw every photographer was a white Western photographer, yeah? And the people who were putting together the show were Oxfam, Christian Aid, Save the Children, NGOs, people who talk about development, talking about the rights of the marginalized, yet this show was there. So I spoke to the organizer, and they said, well, you know, the curator said they don't have the eye. Now, that statement about blacks, about women, about people with disability would have you'd been shot for saying that. But an entire majority world with storytellers can be dismissed because they don't have the eye. So again, we produced another calendar saying having the eye. And in fact, that was what was my first connection to Mexico, because I reached out to majority world photographers across the globe to establish that there were good photographers out there who had the eye. And one of them was Pedro Meyer, a very well-known Mexican photographer, and I wrote to him. And over the years, we've developed a very long relationship. But that went from handwritten letters to typed letters, telexes, faxes, emails, and I actually taught in Skype at one stage. So quite a long route to that. But that was also what got me to Mexico the very first time. And hopefully that also got Pedro to Bangladesh. I got Graciela Iturbide to Bangladesh. One of my students, Cristobal, also came to Bangladesh. And we began to build those bridges. And I think it is up to us, really, not to accept that definition, not to accept that modality, and develop mechanisms through which we can overcome it. So you asking me to be here and talk to you is part of that process. Me telling you these stories is also part of that process. And I think together we can perhaps find ways through which we can build bonds which go beyond the modalities that the West have set for us.
Thank you so much.
Well, Shahidul Bhai, this was amazing. Thank you so much. And I echo Ishita when I say that it's a real honor to be part of this conversation. So I think I want to move the focus a little bit back to where you left off, which is about homes and families. So I want to sort of ask you, home and location and belonging have been extremely contentious issues between the two Bengals, and have been right now actually escalated by various political forces. And as if you don't know, right now all over India, migrant workers are being marked as Bangladeshis. Whether they are Bangladeshi or not, it doesn't matter. Migrant workers are being marked as Bangladeshis and just, again, sometimes disappeared, sometimes deported, and so on. So Bangladesh is just this sort of vicious country which is out to take all of India's jobs, as as our government would have it. So I want to ask then perhaps, what in your work is your notion of belonging and home? Because I have a sense, being a historian, that the notion of belonging comes with so many borderings and so much violence. Not just violence within the home, which is, you know, in terms of gender is very important, but what would you call a desh as a home? Because there are so many deshes or countries within both the geographical border and as well as people's conception of where they live. And sometimes they don't align. And often violence intervenes between these different senses of belonging. So I work with a PhD student. She's a brilliant artist who is a Bengali, West Bengali Muslim woman who comes from a village, a very rural area outside of Kolkata, okay? And she is trying to record the voices of migrant women and their idea of desh. And as she does it, every day a new desh springs up, because everybody's idea of desh is both, in a way, forbidden as well as aspirational. So I want to, especially because you've worked with indigenous people who are at the margins of any kind of idea of nation, belonging, etc., I'm trying to understand what your conception of belonging and desh is and how you see those concepts.
I'll probably cheat in the sense that I will use an example which doesn't relate specifically to Bangladesh, because I think what you're talking about is a global phenomenon. And while the examples for us is very true, I think it is something that's happening now in North America, it's happening in Palestine, and certainly is true of Bangladesh as well. If I were to crystallize it, I would say home. I mean, I actually developed a piece. I did a short film many years ago, because migration is something I've worked on for a very, very long time. And the title of the piece was In Search of the Shade of the Banyan Tree. And I talk about it because of what the banyan tree does, that it reaches out, it gives shelter, and what we aspire to. And perhaps one way to look at it is where I feel safe, where I feel accepted, where the person next to me doesn't see me as a stranger. You know, those are certainly some of the many definitions they might be. But I mean, you see I'm wearing this, and I do that very consciously. There is a university at the moment. This is slightly contentious, but I'll bring it up. There's a university in Bangladesh, I will not name it, which said it would provide scholarships to Palestinian students. Now, obviously, the situation in Palestine is horrendous, and to be able to give scholarships to Palestinian students who could survive, apart from anything else, is very important. But there were lots of objections raised around it, and that created a charged situation, because the Palestinian embassy in Bangladesh opposed this, and people were saying, "Why are you opposing this? These women will get an opportunity; they will live for a start." But what was happening is that they were going through something called COGAT. I don't know if you know what that is. COGAT is a mechanism under the Ministry of Defense of Israel, whereby people who want to leave, and of course people do want to leave, I mean, survive apart from anything else, but have to sign that they will never come back. And what you accept by saving your life, essentially, is the right to return to your home. And that is the condition upon which you're allowed to live, if you like. So that's certainly not voluntary displacement of any form. And now we're looking into this, and while there were some people who, understandably, and I sympathize with people who want to get out, they're dying, yeah? But there were others who felt that that was not the right thing to do. And it was not the right thing to be put in that situation, to be made to decide. It's Sophie's choice. I think those are the pressures within which we're put in. And, you know, you're talking of India, so there's NCA and CA, I've forgotten what all those acronyms are. But one of my very close friends is Arundhati Roy, and I had asked her to make a statement. And I was surprised by not just her, but so many people in India who are normally very vocal, who feel threatened by that situation. They feel there's no ground under our feet. And particularly when, and India is a good example because in a sense, India has borrowed from the Israeli playbook. Absolutely. And replicated that. So particularly now that you have a situation where you have collective punishment, where if you protested, your building is torn down, and most protesters don't own their buildings. You share places with other people. So for your neighbor, you have become a threat because your activism not only endangers you, endangers your neighbor's home in a very direct sense. And this is something that these tyrants have used so effectively. They've shared their own playbook. The problem is we have not shared our playbook. We have not begun that collective resistance, which we need to do in order to be able to fight back. And that is why I'm very happy I'm here, and I'm looking forward to what may come up, because at the end of the day, we can do it if we have that collective strength. And to come back to Bangladesh, the fact that we were able to get rid of a tyrant without using weapons, through a non-violent mechanism, is evidence of what can be done by people power. And we often don't recognize the power that we have, our own agency. And we are made to forget our own agency. That is part of the mechanism through which they control us. And I think it is time for us to remember that we do have agency, we do have strength, and that collective strength is something we need to aspire towards.
Inshallah. By the way, Kogat that Shahidul mentioned is actually illegal according to all international law, because the UN guarantees the right of return to all refugees. It's part of the UN Charter, so that is completely illegal what Israel is doing, like everything else it's doing.
Okay, so before Saurabh comes in, I just quickly wanted to mention, if you know what's happening, it's not just India and Bangladeshis, it's an attack on Bengal, of course, and the Momota phenomena. Recently, they're saying that there's nothing called Bangla Bhasha, it's Bangladeshi Bhasha. And I get these reports from my mother who's like so completely, she doesn't know, where to look and which way to go. Anyway, sorry, yeah. No,
so. Yeah. Thank you. No, please, go ahead, sir. No, sure.
Okay, like Ishita and Tithi, it's an extraordinary honor to have you amidst us, and it's also for me a little daunting. So let me try to phrase my question. I begin with your seemingly simple but really extremely profound point at the end of your formal talk, which is about the relevance of our work. To stay with and think through the terms of relevance and the textures of irrelevance. The challenge of that, because there are forms in the art world, which you describe, but certainly in academics, which are modalities of what I call modern scholasticism, where you forget your own conditions of possibility, which make thought possible, because you are, your own ought triumphs over every contentious is. So in a sense, what I got from the bulk of your talk was also in thinking about relevance and irrelevance is how to face up to understand and learn anew our own privilege, precisely in order to unlearn privilege. And now, this is where I come to the crucial thing. There's something about the last 3-4 years, where, I wake up in the middle at 3 or 4 in the morning about what is, what is about my own work. What am I doing in class? My students are here. So I'm actually reminded of a simple statement which Barbara Streisand had made around 2017, I think, after Trump came in. And she said, things have become really, really difficult. Every night I plan to go on a diet. I'm putting on weight. And then she says, and the next morning I read the news, and particularly about this Trump, and I eat 3 donuts, right? So there was a kind of an existential anxiety about that. But I wonder if, looking back over the last 3 years, going back with 3-4 years, certainly the beginnings of Gaza, this is that existential sort of anxiety. There's a kind of a dark dread, right? So, and it's a kind of an inchoate question, but what I specifically want to focus on, and this comes to me again and again, is that this darkness, this dread, in the midst of, in the middle of all this, there is the nation-state form itself, which takes different manifestations, which finds different manifestations. There can be good nations, bad nations, but there's something about the form itself. There's something about its structure, its sinews, its calls, its seductions. So I just like you to respond to that.
Again, I'll take liberty if I may. Certainly, the nation-state is a problematic thing in terms of the definitions, where one belongs. You were talking of Bangladesh. The language, one of the problems we've had is, am I a Bengali? Am I a Bangladeshi? Because they have different political connotations, and based on those, you fall in one camp or another. And often, of course, it's not as simple as that. There are multiple definitions that we have, and overlapping definitions. But I think central to that is the issue of identity. And I come back to issues of identity and representation because I think those, in a sense, circumvent these ideas of nation states or communities or whatever. And I'm a storyteller. I tend to find anecdotal ways of answering these things. I'm not an academic, and actually when I see an academic on the podium, they bring out these sheets of paper, my heart sinks. No disrespect to academics, but I found academics, including academics on communication, find it very difficult to communicate. But so I will use stories. I find that far more effective. What happened? Again, I told you about the 1988 floods. I was in a place called Gophergaon, near Mymensingh, taking pictures. This is during the floods, the worst flood in a century. And of course, everything's inundated. So the people take shelter in an abandoned warehouse. And they've strung a few saris to create a little bit of privacy for themselves. I don't know what it's like here. Bangladeshi kids love being photographed. In many places you have a problem, but our kids, they absolutely adore it, yeah? And if you have a camera, you're a reporter, by definition, yeah? So these kids come up, camera tulen, take my picture, So I like kids, I'm a photographer, so I'm happy to take this picture. So I take them to a broken window where there's this nice Rembrandt-like light coming in. They all stand at attention as they usually do. And I'm taking this picture. As I'm pressing the shutter, I realize that there's a kid right in the middle who's pushed himself. He's not the tallest. He's pushed himself into the middle of the frame, who's blind. And I'm sort of left wondering, why is it so important for this blind boy to be in the middle of a frame that he will never see? You will find that picture in that book. I was less experienced at that time. Had it been today, I would have taken time, interviewed the kid, found out what it was, but I didn't. I missed that opportunity. But I've thought about it. It's something that I've reflected upon a lot. Now, in terms of how people are portrayed or represented, someone like me, who's relatively well known, will be in the news. My photograph will be there. I will be talked about. I have an identity. I'm an individual. You know me as a person. But when it comes to the subaltern, it's generally not the case. They're a number. They exist as statistics. When horrendous things happen, their stories are told about. Or if they've done something grotesque, then they might exist as an individual. But generally, they are people in the thousands. The mass is what is talked about. Unless you're photographed and you appear somewhere. Because that is you. Your image is not something that is a number, that is you. You are personified. And for me, I work with newspapers in media, and for a newspaper, the stakeholders are not the average public. 3 sets of stakeholders: the people who buy the newspaper, the advertisers, and the owners. They are the major. Newspapers tell you about how they glorify, they represent the masses and everything else. But in fact, it's a business. And those are the 3 sets of people they adhere to, they cater for. No one else matters. And certainly the subaltern, the poor, do not feature at all. So when there is a story about someone in a place like Goffergau, like this child in a flood, the child would never feature as an individual. That humanistic story would never be there unless that person's photograph appeared. And I began to wonder that perhaps this child feels that by taking his photograph, by photographing him, I could transform him from being a statistic to a person. And that was a very powerful feeling, that my photograph is not merely an artistic or a journalistic representation, but I am able to transport a person from a particular social class to another. I can make a person exist, at least temporarily. And that was a very powerful thought. And that is what I've been left with, because when we talk about all of those things, I think one of the ways in which the powerful elite get away with it is by depriving us of agency. And through many means, agency can come in many forms. Through resistance, through collective bargaining, through a photograph appearing on a printed page, perhaps. And I say this because, again, I will come back to that. I am part of a campaign. I'm a photographer, I'm a writer, I take photographs, and people call me all sorts of things, but at the end of the day, I'm an activist. And that is my primary identity. The reason I do, the reason I take photographs, the reason I write, the reason I come here and talk to you, is because I believe it matters. I believe I can make a difference. I believe I can leave an impression of some form. And I hope that my photographs, my art, in some way will affect you sufficiently so when you've walked away, it will haunt you. If I've done my work, that is what I aspire towards. So I will not let you stay in your zone of comfort. I will not let you sleep quietly. I will disturb you. That is my job. And I think that is our job in whatever definition, whether it's a nation state or whatever. They try and put us in those cubby holes, and we need to break out of that.
Thank you. No. Yes, but then you open it to the public.
Yes, as a matter of fact, unless you...
No,
You
no,
want
no.
to? No?
You are the moderator.
Okay, great. So, want to make a pause here. Queremos hacer una pausa because we would like you to join the conversation. So we would like to, I would like to take a few questions, perhaps 2 or 3 at a time, so that Shahidul can reply to you. In case, if you feel comfortable speaking in English, great. If not, I think we can ask Daniel to translate, or even one of us. So please, yes.
Sorry, we need a volunteer first to pass, pass the, okay. Oh, great, okay.
Yes, and also if you could, yes, and that one? And if you could just tell us, before you pose a question, your name and when you come from, please. Por favor.
Okay.
Adelante. Entonces,
Hi.
Tu nombre y...
Hi, Shahidul, how are you? And no. I'm sister of Cristobal. Can you share with us concrete numbers or facts of your dream as something concrete? I don't know if I am thinking. ¿Tú me entiendes?
¿Puedes hablar en español?
Sí. Pero es que lo estoy pensando, o sea, ni siquiera tengo como. A ver.
I think she means like, could you put into concrete words like the world you're fighting for, like?
No, concrete examples of what have you achieved with, for example, the case of the woman that you documented also in steps. You share with us the 3 steps you did, but what was the real impact as in the society, for example, or other works that you have done? How can you feel the impact of your dream?
Okay. Yeah. So if I understand correctly, impact. What impact does my work have?
And if it is measurable.
Yeah. How you measure the parameters might differ, but I will actually start from how people control us. And certainly, and I'm sure it's in other places as well, what has happened in my country and what led to this very tyrannical situation was that the regime destroyed all the state institutions. The police, the bureaucracy, the judiciary, even the education sector. Everything became politicized. And merit no longer mattered. The only thing that mattered was evidence of party loyalty. That was the only thing that allowed you to progress or not. Yeah? And my strategy was at 2 folds. One, I was not going to be a politician, but I wanted to be politically active. So I chose 3 areas of intervention: media, education, and culture. And across those 3 areas, I wanted to exert pressure upon the political space so politicians couldn't get away with their indiscretions. But in doing so, what I've tried to do is to build robust institutions in all 3 areas. DRIC was the agency, the media agency. Pathshala is the school of photography, which now is recognized as one of the finest schools of photography in the world. And a festival called Chobimala, which is what got Graziella and Pedro and Cristobal to Bangladesh. And it was also very interesting. There's a photographer, Jody Bieber from South Africa, who admired Graziella hugely, but they met in Bangladesh. Yeah? So that common ground, building that common ground. So whether I have impact or not will depend upon whether these institutions survive when I'm gone. So it's too early to say. But the fact that I was picked up, the fact that I was tortured, that I was put in jail, in a sense is evidence of the fact that perhaps I do matter. Because otherwise they wouldn't worry about it. It's one way of answering it, but I do feel that, and I say this because it is not my job to be popular. And I think unless what I'm doing makes certain people uncomfortable, I've probably not done my job.
Yeah. Gracias.
Thank you. So perhaps if we could, podemos juntar dos o tres preguntas so that we can take advantage of the time. Just we can have 1-2 questions at the same time.
Hi, I'm John Marston. I'm a retired professor here at the Center for Asian African Studies. And when I was thinking about you, what you've been talking about, is thinking about how things have changed with cell phones and social media. And I thought that would be something you might want to talk about. I'm an anthropologist by training, and for example, when I work in Cambodia, and for example, when I used to go to weddings and funerals, you know, I would take pictures and then I would try to share them with people. And there's certain villages that I'm connected to, and actually now they all have cell phones and they all are on Facebook. And so I go to a wedding or a funeral, and then I'm collecting my pictures, and then the people there they all have, even poor people have cell phones, of course, and they share their pictures on Facebook, and then I'm collecting their photos along with my own photos. And so I thought that would be something that somehow, of course, you're talking about something more political, and yet that could lend itself to the political too.
Thank you. Somebody else? ¿Alguien más? Por favor.
Hola, Shahidul. How are you? I do remember an anecdote with the people of Drake office. That's exactly the thing that my sister asked, and some of the things you reply. I remember this anecdote that you were like the St. Peters of inside of the Drake office, that you have a lot of keys with you. I remember that several people told me that anecdote. I never heard it for you, by the way, but it was around, that you give the responsibility of a key to each member, you know, in Patshala, in Drake, in Majority World, and what else? Choimela, you know. And your objective is to be only with probably 1 or 2 keys, and that you will feel fulfilled with the repartition of responsibilities. You know, I remember that as a very concrete anecdote that represent what Drake and the body of work of what you have done since you start this adventure of the image and the vision. Thank you, Shahidul.
Thank you. Yes, please. And your name and tu nom.
I'm a PhD student here. Well, thinking about what you mentioned about these newspapers being this voice or platform for the people, but also at the same time being a business, and thinking also about what was mentioned about a lot of people having more access to phones and posting on social media. What is the tension, considering also about the work that you do, between these people being able to have a platform to massify their voice through different channels and to reach a much bigger audience, but also this tension between the empowerment and the business model that is between in this type of platforms and opportunities for people? Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. There is an overlap in the questions. I mean, certainly in the early 80s, when I looked around, when I was going around the marches with the Socialist Workers' Party, I could see photography as being the powerful tool. It still is a very powerful tool. But if I were starting today, I would probably be looking at social media. I would looking at AI in terms of being relevant, in terms, I would still use photography, but I think those are very, very powerful tools. And one of the reasons why they're powerful is because of this shift in agency. Because today, the mainstream media is not anymore the only disseminator of information. You and I can challenge that perception. Of course, there are algorithms and money matters and there's all those sort of things there, but there is still always the possibility that you can challenge the mainstream version, which I think is very, very important. And that really was the idea that when you were talking about those kids, for instance, one of them now is the head of our gallery, one of them is the head of our procurement, one is a senior editor at Channel I. They're all young professionals who have a different point of view, not necessarily the way I would want it to be, but that's their decision. But I think what happens through this process is that change comes about because of a transfer of agency. And that is also why photography as an art form is so important, because in the other art forms that is not as democratic. Just the fact that pretty much everyone has a mobile phone with a camera means that I am not anymore the only person who is telling the story. There are many people, and there are always many, many truths. There are many viewpoints. And there is that challenge constantly. And I welcome that. I think the domain of the professional is less than it used to be. I think the domain of the media magnate is less. Citizen Kane does not exist in the same way, though there are attempts to do that. Maxwell and other people are there. But there are very valid ways of challenging it. And today, some of the influencers are not people with big money backers or whatever, but they have something which people will follow, which people will adhere to. I'm not saying they're necessarily right or wrong, but they have a mechanism. And there is a tool at their disposal which changes the power dynamic. And I think that's very powerful.
Thank you very much. So, unfortunately, I think it's time, to close this talk, because Shahidul has other engagements after this. But it's really been an honor, a pleasure to have you here, to have this opportunity to talk. I think we should see this as the beginning of a conversation. So there is, I mentioned in the beginning that the webpage of DRIC is there. So it's for all of us. It's got this wonderful digital archive. I myself enjoyed a lot seeing the videos, of the rural areas. So please, let's carry on this conversation through the webpage, via the exhibition that it's these days at the Museo Vivo del Muralismo. I hope you're happy to know that certainly visiting the exhibition leaves you unsettled, so you've done your work. It's a wonderful, wonderful choice of photographs, and the curatorial work is really wonderful, exquisite. So thank you so much for being here and for having started this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Muchas gracias.
Alex.